Thank you and good morning, ladies and gentlemen, for coming here this morning. As you know, that we've been going around Fiji having consultations with all the civil servants. We initially were here, for example, some weeks back where we met with all the teachers. And then obviously there was a lot of queries from nurses too. So what we've decided to do is essentially hold these sessions, not just only for nurses, but any civil servant that wants to attend. There's obviously quite a lot of misinformation out there. We want to be able to clarify that for you. The idea is to have the proceedings fairly informal. What we'll do is I'll run through with you a very short slide presentation, essentially to talk to you about some of the reforms. And then Jane Curran, who's the Director for Civil Service Reform Management Unit, will take you through the actual job evaluation exercise and how it was carried out and what were some of the key areas that were taken into consideration. And then, of course, then we'll have the question and answer session. Please feel free to ask any questions. If you have any issues, you may have some individual matters. We've also got a manner in which we can deal with the individual matters. Once we've finished with that, and then we'll I do a short presentation on the budget. I think it's important for you to understand how it affects your individual ministries, where the money is going, etc. With your concurrence, if that's okay with you. Are you okay with that format? Is that okay? Okay. You'll have to excuse me a bit because I'm a bit low on energy. I'm suffering from food poisoning. But I said I have to go to Savusavu because I gave a commitment. So in case I collapse, hopefully there's a lot of nurses over here who can look after me. Okay, so ladies and gentlemen, let me start off. First up, I hope that's big enough for you. You can see a lot of people talk about retirement age. The retirement age in Fiji at independence was 60. When Rambuka carried out the coup in 1987, he reduced the age from 60 to 55. And it continued until the Garase government, which then put up the retirement age from 55 to 60. There's a lot of speculation as to why they did do it. Some people say that Rambuka did it because he wanted to get rid of a whole heap of civil servants he did not like, and probably because of their ethnicity. Then, of course, the Garase government wanted to retain some people who apparently were politically supporting them, so he wanted them to stay within the system. What I can tell you for sure is why we reduced it to 55. We reduced the retirement age to 55 in 2007 because today nearly 70% of the entire Fijian population is below the age of 40. So those of you who are over the age of 40, like me, you are in the minority. The people who are below the age of 40 are the majority. There's, of course, later on you'll also see some statistics. Unemployment in Fiji has dropped to about 5.5%, which is the lowest it's ever been in the past 15 years. But the reality is that youth unemployment is higher than the average national unemployment rate. So we have to be mindful of that. And that's the reason why we actually reduced the retirement age to 55. That retirement age was actually challenged by one of the unions, and we did go to court. And the court, of course, ruled in the favor of government, that government had the ability to reduce the retirement age to 55. Essentially, the idea is that those people who reach the age of 55 and do retire, there's a number of ways in which we protect them. So, for example, teachers in particular, when they're teaching, obviously if their retirement age, when they reach 55, is, say, in the middle of the term, we've said that they can continue till the end of the term, otherwise it will lead to disruptions within that particular service that's being delivered by the teachers. So similarly, there are certain cases where the retirement age is brought to the end of a particular period where it will cause the minimum level of disruption to the service being delivered. There are some people who are actually retained beyond the age of 55 if, for example, that particular skill set that they have is in short supply. So there are some people who have been, for example, there's certain engineers in certain areas that we understand that there are a shortage of midwives, so people have been retained beyond the age of 55. But of course, subject to the fact that people need to be, ensured that there is succession planning within that particular ministry. People cannot continue to have their contracts continuously extended. If we can have the next one, please. Now, what is the objective of the civil service reform? The idea, of course, is to create not just better working terms and conditions, not just better salaries, not just better allowances, but also to create a particular level of transparency that actually has not taken place within the civil service for a long period of time. We need to have transparency within the decision-making process. As you know, also under the Constitution, the Permanent Secretary is the one who employs you of your respective ministry. You're not employed by the PSC, you're employed by the ministry. So your contracts that you have is signed between your ministry, which is the Permanent Secretary, and yourself. So that's the legal binding document, and that gives you actually legal protection. As you know, that under the Constitution is now the Permanent Secretaries, of course, who are the ones who are responsible for that. They, of course, are also responsible for the finance of the ministries. The ministers aren't responsible for the finance. The budget is given to the respective Permanent Secretaries or to the ministry, and then they work within that, and it's their job to be able to ensure the implementation of that. Civil service reform, of course, we want to retain and attract good people. We want to ensure that people, when they get paid well, they stay within the system. One of the things that we did find when there was a study done is that generally, at the intake level or the graduate level, we pay a lot better than the private sector. But if you look at in a lot of the positions, you will see, as far as the salaries are concerned, the civil servants sit here, the private sector sits here. But as the years go by, we go down, they come up. That's been a problem that's been identified. This is why a lot of the people who have retained a lot of experience within civil service, you'll find after 5, 10 years, they tend to leave if they'll get a better job somewhere else. Because we aren't able to maintain that level of salary, or those levels of terms and conditions that the private sector offers for a person who may have had like 8, 10 years worth of experience. So we find, for example, a lot of economists, a lot of people who've gained a lot of experience in other professions that the private sector seeks, or other multilateral agencies, they tend to leave us. So the idea is to correct that. This is why, for example, with the nurses, we now have specialist nurse category that recognizes. Previously, it did not recognize that. So this is why we're able to make the distinction. So this is why those nurses are in fact getting a 70% pay rise. That's the highest pay rise, ever in Fiji's history, where you get people being jumped one day from, a particular level and you get a 70% pay rise. You now have principals and head teachers being given a 40-50% pay rise. Land surveyors are getting, a pay rise of up to about 40%, 38%, 38%. They're quite significant. Before the whole idea was, we would get everybody 5% across the board. It did not recognize the specialist skill sets that's required. Of course, for us, we want the reforms because we want the civil service to be highly performing. Because if you're high performers, then obviously you'll be able to service the public better, and we need to be able to service the public a lot better than what we are currently doing. Next one, please. OMRS, what is the OMRS? OMRS, of course, is open merit recruitment system, where we need to be able to assess everybody on merit. It's not about who you know or how long have you been within the system. It's how well you can actually perform in the job. As I've said in so many other occasions, people have said to me, oh, that person got the job because he's Itoke, or that person got the job because he's Indo-Fijian, or that person got the job because, the permanent secretary knows them, they come from the same village or same province, or they go to the same church, or these people were in school together, whatever the case is. We need to be able to get rid of all of that, because OMRS actually ensures that everybody gets assessed on a level playing field. So it's, for example, if these three people here, all three of them apply for a job, and the lady in the middle gets the job, the other two know that she's got the job because she's the most deserving candidate. But if she gets the job without necessarily being the most deserving, these two won't actually have any respect for them. And when they actually have to work together, they won't work well with them because they know, well, this person should not have actually got the job. And in fact, we see that happening quite a lot in many of the ministries. So these are the kind of things that the OMRS is supposed to actually, solve. Of course, to ensure that the OMRS actually works well, we have said that any position that's below band J, when you have a panel of 3 people who are actually going to interview you, at least one person on the panel has to be from outside the ministry to give that level of independence. If it's a position J and above, one person has to be from the ministry, one from outside the ministry, and one completely outside from government, because they're senior positions, so we need to be able to get some independent assessments of those jobs. Of course, there is a review process. So, for example, if you apply for a job and one of you is not happy with it, say these 3 people apply for the jobs, and the gentleman here is not happy with the process, he has the ability to appeal it. Now, when he appeals, nobody has to know about it. He appeals to the PSC. Why does he appeal to the PSC? Is because the permanent secretaries have to be responsible to ensure, or responsible enough to ensure that any processes to do with any of the jobs in any of the positions in their ministry are in accordance with the guidelines that have been set out. So if they are not doing the job, they are answerable to their employer, and their employer is the Public Service Commission. So the Public Service Commission has a full-time commissioner now, Laurie McGrath, who's an Australian, with widespread experience in this area, and Laurie actually hears appeals. So when this gentleman applies, assuming, so which ministry do you work? If he's in Ministry of Health, when he appeals, his superior does not have to know, his permanent secretary does not have to know. He writes directly to the PSC. It's paper-based. He writes directly to the PSC. They then make a ruling. If they find that what he said is actually true, that the process was irregular, then they actually give a directive to the permanent secretary and say, you have to go through the entire process again. Nobody will know who actually appealed. Because obviously if he's going to apply for the job again, we don't want him to be victimized. We've already had a number of people who have appealed. 4 or 5 of the appeals already have been upheld. So the process obviously is working. We need to ensure that all the persons who actually also sit on the panel have all been trained. A few months back, there was a particular position in the Ministry of Economy where when it came up to us, we said we rejected it because we found out that one of the persons who actually sat on the panel did not have the training. So I urge all of you, you can also be part of panels. So you should get that level of training. You can request the training. We can have a whole session with you over here in Savusavu, no problems, and you can get training there. So you yourself can actually go and sit on people's panels because they'll want people from outside. Now, next one, please. Now, the contracts. All the contracts are under the regulations. Contracts can be up to a maximum of 5 years. We have said that the teachers and the nurses will get their contracts automatically renewed because of the fact there's such a large cadre of them and generally the way that the positions and the profession works out to be. The permanent officers they get a maximum up to 5 years. There's a lot of misinformation. I know a lot of unions went around, a lot of people spread a lot of misinformation saying that if you get a contract, you cannot get loans from the bank, which is absolutely nonsense. Everybody that does not work for government, in Savusavu, everywhere else, they all have contracts in the private sector. They all get bank loans. When I used to work in the private sector, before I got this job, I had 2 bank loans and I had a 3-year employment contract wherever I worked, when I worked in Colonial. So you can get bank loans. It's a myth to say you don't get bank loans. The other point, of course, is already before these reforms, already 70% of the entire Fijian civil service were actually on contracts in any case. So the majority of the people were there. Just because you have a contract, it does not mean that there is something to fear. It does not mean, for example, assuming that I'm a permanent secretary, that I can wake up in the morning and because I don't like the color of this lady's scarf that I can fire. I can't do that. It does not work that way. When you have a contract, the contract itself stipulates your rights. It also stipulates the obligations of whoever actually is the person that's employed you. You are then also, there's discipline guidelines that's also rolled out. All of this is available. You can go to the website and check it out. The discipline guidelines also says how should a person be disciplined. And that again has to ensure that there's principles of natural justice. So for example, if taking these 3 people as an example, if this lady there's an allegation made against her, the principle of natural justice must be adhered to, which is there's an allegation against her, she must also then be given a right to respond to it. And then if there's a hearing, the hearing needs to be obviously transparent. If there's a decision that's been arrived at, the reasons and the rationale for the decision must be given to her. If she's still not happy with it, she can appeal. She can go to the Employment Relations Tribunal. If she's not happy with that, she can also go to the High Court of Fiji. So there's various avenues available. But a lot of people don't realize it, that when you actually have a contract, the contract gives you a lot more security when you don't have a contract. A lot of people don't understand, and that's how it works also in the private sector. The contract actually confirms the fundamental shift to remuneration, not just a single pay increase. So if you, those of you who have not signed a contract, the contract, you don't have to sign it. You won't get the pay rise because obviously the contract captures the pay rise. But the contract also does tell you, and what it entails, is that subsequently, that now this pay, the remuneration that we exercise that we've carried out the job evaluation, we are now fixing up everybody's base, trying to get the base right. Once we get the base right, then every year or every 18 months or every 2 years, whatever the case may be, we'll have regular assessments of you. And when you have that regular assessment of yourself, you then have the ability to have another pay rise individually. So assuming all these 6 people here work in a particular department or have perform a particular job, when we have the individual assessments being carried out, this lady, say, may be turning up to work at 10 o'clock in the morning every day and combing her hair at 4 o'clock to leave at 4:30. Obviously, her assessment won't come out as good as somebody who's performing a lot better. If this lady is spending half her time in the grog bowl, obviously she should not get the same pay rise as the other people. Her assessment won't come out as well. But if these people actually are performing really well, then obviously the assessment then gives you the ability to have a higher pay rise and the ability to move within the band. Those of you who've been within the system for long will know that a lot of people in Fiji, in the civil service, have been driven by titles. I still see it today. People love titles in the civil service. The reason why they love titles is because it assures them of a pay rise. It means if your title is higher, that means you get a bigger pay rise. So what used to happen traditionally is that a lot of people say, say if I'm working in the Ministry of Industry and Trade, I've specialized in trade, I've been in that ministry for 10 years, I've been overseas, been to conferences, but maybe assuming that I'm at a senior level. You have your junior, you have a senior, then a principal. But there may be no principal opening position in my ministry. And the reason why I want to go up to principal is because I want a pay rise. But the old system doesn't allow you to do that. Normally when they appoint you to a position, they put you at the lowest bracket of that range. But it's very hard to move within that range. So then, I will then apply, there may be a principal position in Ministry of Mangroves, and I'll go there. I may know nothing about mangroves. But because I've been in the civil service for 10 or 15 years, they'll probably give me the job. When I go to mangroves, I may get the pay rise, but absolutely I'm not interested in the job at all. Because I love trade. I want to deal with trade. So there is no ability to have specific career paths in the old system. The new system actually gives you the ability to have specific career paths. A lot of people change positions or used to change positions in the civil service just so they can get the title, and that title means actually the salary increase. So that's what we're trying to also, of course, avoid. So those of you who have not signed the contract, there's no pressure on you to sign the contract. You cannot sign the contract, but you simply just won't get the pay rise. And obviously the pay that you'll continue to get will affect the responsibility of work that you will have. And Jane can explain that to you a bit later on. Now, we talked about discipline and the reforms. One of the things that we've said is that discipline does not always have to be negative. Discipline can also be very positive. The example that I have used throughout the sessions is that a lot of the teachers, for example, in Fiji, double up as counselors. The reason why they double up as counselors is because we don't actually have professional counselors, many professional counselors in Fiji. So, nobody pursues counseling as a specific career path. So this, assuming, this lady here, if she's a teacher, she may double up as a counselor. Now, there may be a complaint lodged against her. When she was performing her role as a counselor, some student may not have liked the way that she handled something, or a teacher or a parent, whatever the case may be. And they lodged a complaint. And if there's a finding and they said, yes, she did something or she did not do something that she was supposed to do, then you have to go behind the reasons to why that she did not do that. The reason why she did not probably do that is because she does not have the training in that area. She has absolutely no idea how to handle that situation. Yes, she was at fault by not doing that, but it was not something deliberate. It was not because she was negligent. She just simply did not have the capacity to be able to deliver. So the positive discipline outcome for that would be that we need to send her for training for 3 months, or whatever the case may be, so she can actually learn to do her job better. I'm sure many of you have sometimes been pushed in roles in your job where you should not be doing that. It's outside the scope of your work. But there may be a requirement for that, so we need to be able to give you training. So that's what that's what you mean by positive discipline. Of course, like I said, there needs to be natural justice. There may be issues pertaining to improvements in supervision and management. A lot of the times in the sessions you may have seen it's covered a lot in the newspapers and also on television. One of the issues we found in all our sessions that some of the ministries, people aren't able to communicate well. With a lot of issues we found, for example, with the nurses, that the reason all those problems arose is because the HR department or the supervisor did not communicate properly as to what was the actual requirement. The communication levels is not very good. And that's one of the things that we do want to do is that is also to strengthen the HR departments of many of the ministries. We also, of course, welcome your suggestion on how to improve communication at all levels of training. Performance assessment, as I mentioned, is currently the work is being carried out. There will be also consultations regarding that. We hope to have the guidelines, rolled out by 2017. You'll know beforehand, this is your individual assessments. After the base is all fixed up, we're going to get individual assessments. You'll know exactly beforehand on what basis will you be assessed. So this is a good thing because you get regular opportunities to be able to be assessed and of course be rewarded if you're doing well. Now, you'll know in advance the range of assessment tools, including generic and technical criteria and avenue and appeal. I know, for example, the Solicitor General's office is already doing this. So when a lawyer gets assessed in the SG's office, they don't only get assessed by their superiors, they also get assessed by the subordinates, people who work for them too. So they are able to get feedback from both ends. So then you know how that person is performing both as a leader and also as somebody who is a subordinate to somebody else. And once the assessment is done, assuming that this lady is not happy with her assessment, you also have the opportunity to then appeal. Say, well, these people did not assess me correctly because of X, Y, Z. So these are all the things that are actually being rolled out. As I said, the results will confirm the movements up the steps. Benny, can I have So, as I said here, oops, sorry. It will confirm your movement up the steps in the salary bands. Pay increases with the budget cycle, and of course, the renewal of contracts. But the important thing is here is that you can't move within the bands. You've been given the sheets, and Jane, of course, will talk to you about that as to how that can happen. I have to tell you that when the unions were actually talking to us, this is late last year. Is it late last year, Jane? In December, because we wanted to engage with them throughout. And they came and said, look, why don't you just not do any of this and just give us a 15% pay rise across the board. Give everybody a 15% pay rise. And we said no. Because if you just do a 15% pay rise across the board for everybody, you're actually shortchanging some of your members. Because some of the people today have got a 70% pay rise. Some people have got a 40% pay rise. And I said, so firstly, you'll be dealing with things on the old way of doing things. You're not actually giving some of your members who need to be given a higher pay rise that recognition. Secondly, by doing a 15% pay rise across the board, you're disincentivizing people. You're not creating specialist categories. Like nurses today, under the reform, have got specialist categories. There are more opportunities for people to actually aim for different, categories of nursing that they can aim for and get a higher pay rise. By just giving 15% across the board and not making those demarcations, you're not creating that recognition of specialization. The other issue, of course, is that if you just gave 15% pay rise across the board, people who are the non-performers will also get a pay rise. People who are the high performers will also get a pay rise, and all of them at the same level. So, the guy who's doing the person who's doing the high performing will say, what's the point? I might as well come to work at 8 o'clock in the morning, or not 8 o'clock, but I come to work at 9 o'clock too. Let's take a 1-hour tea break, because we're all going to get, the same pay rise. So these are some of the issues that we did highlight to them. So you have to be able to understand that. Now, the other thing is, apart from the pay rise that we've actually given you, because of the fact that you've got a tax cut, because of the fact that we've increased the income tax threshold. As you know, that as announced in the budget, anybody that now earns less than $30,000 does no longer pay any taxes. Before, the income tax threshold was $16,000. What a lot of people don't realize is that because the income tax threshold has gone up to $30,000, even people who earn more than $30,000 have also got a tax cut. That's how the tax system works, because you subsequently have to reduce the tax percentage even over $30,000. And let me give you an example of that. So, the example over here, they've got sheet copies of this? Okay, so you've got copies of this. So for example, if you're a registered nurse in Band F, under the old system, you're getting $17,000. Income tax, can you just go a little bit higher, please? Okay, so Band F, $17,000. Income tax threshold was at $16,000. You paid $107 tax. Your total net pay after tax was $17,400. Okay? Now then, after job evaluation, the salary has gone up from $17,000 to $20,163. So your tax would be at $16,000 threshold, $291.43. So take-home pay is $19,871, which means if you take that into account, you've got a pay rise of more money in your pocket of $2,400 that you take home in your pocket more every year. Now, because of the fact that you no longer pay tax, that pay rise of $20,000, you no longer pay tax. So in other words, your pay rise is in fact $2,700. Yep, we understand? Understand that? Let's look at somebody who's open. So a person, for example, a senior surveyor, before the reforms, getting paid $31,000. Income tax threshold, $16,000, pay $2,000 tax. Net take-home pay was $29,000. Now the pay has jumped from $31,000 to $43,000. That's the pay rise. Now, so they pay income tax threshold of at $16,000. They pay $4,200 tax. Net take-home pay is $39,000. In other words, they're taking more. They're taking $9,800 more in their pocket. Now, because the income tax threshold has now gone up to $30,000, and even though they're earning more than $30,000, they also have a tax cut. So they get $43,000 as a pay rise. Instead of paying $4,200 tax, they now pay $2,300 tax. So the total amount of new money they're taking home in their pocket is $11,000. You can see the point of difference that the tax cuts have actually done. So you remember the pay rise that you're getting is not just because of straight pay rise, but also because of the tax cut. It puts more dollars in your pocket at the end of the day in the practical level. Maybe just use another one. So if you look, say, here's the last one, is it? The director of nursing, Band L, currently gets $44,000, pays $4,400 tax, take-home pay $39,000. Now that director of nursing jumps from $44,000 to $67,000 now. Under the old system, on the tax threshold of $9,000 they pay, at $16,000 threshold. Take-home pay, $58,000. In other words, they're taking $18,800 more a year. But now, because of the tax cut, instead of paying $9,000 tax, they'll pay $7,000 tax. So the total take-home pay is about $20,708 more in their pocket. So please understand that in terms of how the system works. Next, please. I will now hand you over to Jane. Those of you who have not met Jane before, Jane is actually the director of the Civil Service Reform Management Unit. Jane actually first came to Fiji, as far as this time is concerned, is that she was brought in to develop the HR system for the Fijian Elections Office. As you know, before the 2014 elections, all other previous elections, the Supervisor of Elections Office, as it was called then, was never fully staffed. They only got staffed come election time. So just before elections, they pull people from the different ministries, staff it up, run the elections, and then after elections, everybody went back to wherever they came from. To run an internationally certified elections office, you need to have full-time staff running the elections office all the time. Today, the Fijian elections office is something like 63 people or 68 people, 60 to 68 people working there. So Jane was actually brought in to develop the HR system, and she did such a fantastic job and she came to us through the Department of Foreign Affairs and Trade from Australia under the AIDS scheme. And now, of course, we employ her as the Director of Civil Service Reform Management Unit, and she's been the major one sort of driving many of the practical implementation of this. So I'll hand you over to Jane now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Good morning, everybody. I'm going to take you through some of the more technical aspects of the job evaluation to give you a bit of an understanding of how the jobs were evaluated and also how the salary bands were constructed and what we mean when we say that we've benchmarked to the private sector. So a little bit of HR theory for everybody. I'll start with the job evaluation guidelines. So this is the policy document. The Minister talked through the other guidelines that have already been released. So job evaluation covers the fundamental change to the way we approach pay. So position-based pay, we evaluate the position. This is not about you or the person who sits in the position. This is about the requirements of the position. So the duties of the position, the qualifications, the level of experience, the level of responsibility that's required by the position. So the person and the position are considered quite separately. And then the bands, of course, are determined by the outcome of the evaluation of the position. So I'll explain the factors that we use. Each one gets a score, comes up to a total, and that then assigns it to the band. Qualification requirements, I'll go through all of the factors that we consider. Qualifications are one of the factors, but only one of the 10 factors that are used when we evaluate the jobs. Because we're evaluating the job and not the person, we assume that the person who will occupy the job will be competent. So we're not looking at the performance of the person when we're evaluating the job. So we're assuming that whoever goes in will be able to undertake all of the requirements of the job. We also assume that the workforce management in the ministry is right. So volume of work is not a consideration in job evaluation. We know that there are issues with the volume of work, that some jobs have too much and some jobs have too little, but that can't be fixed through job evaluation, and it's not a factor when we look at what level the job should go on to. That needs to be fixed through restructuring or reassigning duties or evening out the workloads, but not through job evaluation. So just to pull the different guidelines together so that you understand how they actually work together to determine how your employment is looked at. So job evaluation determines the band of the position and therefore how much you get paid once you're in the job. Open merit is about how you get selected for the job. So it's the process of advertising and selection that determines who has the most merit and then actually sits in the job. Discipline is how we make sure that you act the way we want you to in the workplace, that you follow the code of conduct and that you perform to the level that's required in the job. And then the last one is performance management, which is how we do a formal assessment to reward you. That's how we look at your performance in the job and say, well, this person's doing a better job than the person sitting next to them, so they therefore should get paid more than the person who's sitting next to them. That's how you move through the different steps in the band. Okay? So job evaluation assigns the band to the position, but performance management determines how you move on to the different steps within the band. So there have been some issues in terms of rolling out the job evaluation. So the results of the job evaluation, where we've had issues with whether positions are on the right band or not, they reflect the quality of the information that was provided. So some of the job descriptions that were written, and a lot of you would have been involved in writing up the job descriptions, some of them had better information than others. And the job evaluation committees, who were responsible for evaluating the jobs, so we trained 200 people across the civil service. They're accredited internationally by the company who runs the training. They have to rely on the information that you supply. So some of the job descriptions didn't accurately reflect all of the requirements of the job. Where that's happened, we take requests for review. There is a process in the guideline that says that you can apply for a review of the band. So all of the jobs are now complete. The tranche 3 lists were sent to the permanent secretaries actually last week, and we've started to send out the payroll reports now. So the contracts for tranche 3 will be coming out during this week. With the contracts, the lists are generated from the payroll. So we check them, we make sure that the percentage increases look right, and then we send them to the ministries. So anyone whose contract is missing, we need to go back and check the payroll and see why it wasn't generated. Sometimes it's because you're listed under a separate cost centre that may have been missed. Sometimes it's because you weren't in the pay cycle for whatever reason. You might have been on leave without pay in a particular pay cycle when the reports were generated. But the ministry is supposed to check to make sure that everyone who is working is on the report. Okay? So in the bigger ministries, obviously that takes more time than it does in the smaller ministries. But the first step, if you haven't received a contract, contact your HR people because they can then start that checking process. The contracts are for your substantive position. So if you're acting in a position, you will get a contract at the position that you actually belong to. And then you'll get another acting letter for the higher acting allowance for the new position. Now again, there are some issues with the way payroll generates the reports in terms of acting. So sometimes the acting letter takes a little bit longer to come through than the individual contract. Nurses have gone on most of them have gone on to the transitional step in the salary bands, and that's because step 1 is above 15%, and I'll talk a little bit more about the 15% rule when we get to that. There has been some inaccurate information coming out. So there are no salary decreases. I check the reports before I send them to the ministries. There is a column that shows me the percentage increase, and everyone has been offered an increase. The increases do vary because it depends on how closely your position already matched the private sector as to how much the increase would then be. Okay? And it also depends on what step you were on the previous salary bands. Anyone who thinks that they've been offered a decrease needs to check with their HR because it will not be correct. Okay? It is definitely not correct. Like I mentioned, you can ask for a review of the band that the position has gone to. So if you think that your position was not fairly evaluated and that it's not on the right band, if you think that it's been undervalued, the process is in the guideline, and you write to your permanent secretary and you say, I think my job belongs on a different band for this reason, and you provide us with different documentation. So there's no point in putting in the same job description because it will come out on the same band. You have to show that something is different to what we evaluated the first time round. That's also the process if a job changes. And we know that sometimes duties get reallocated, ministries go through restructures. So when that happens, that's when a re-evaluation or an evaluation of the new job happens as well. Sometimes it will change band and sometimes it won't. It would depend on how big the change was. There's no deadline for requests for review, but of course the contract start dates are linked to the date that you sign. So the start date for the salary increase is the first pay, so the first pay fortnight in the month that the contract is signed. So it's not the beginning of the month, it's the first pay fortnight in the month that the contract is signed. So in August, that was the 13th of August. In September, it's the 10th of September. In October, it's the 8th of October, because that's the beginning of the pay fortnight that starts in that month. Okay? So if you sign your contract this month, the payment date is the 10th of September. Okay? If it rolls over into next month, it becomes the 8th of October. The only exception to that is where it's our fault, and I'm talking about like a collective our fault. So if for some reason the contract wasn't issued in August and it should have been, so you're one of those people who might have been missed, then of course we'll backdate to August. Okay? If it's collectively our fault, then we'll make sure that you're not disadvantaged by that, and the ministry will keep track of that. So I mentioned the 15%. This has been widely publicised. Where the increase in the salary for the job is more than 15%, the job has to be advertised. Okay, so the threshold was set. The original guideline that came out said 10%, and it was increased to 15%. So that means that sometimes you'll look at your contract and you'll say, oh, but I thought I'm a specialist nurse, I thought I was going to get a 40% increase, but I've only got a 10% increase. And that's why, because you'll be given a contract at the lower band and then you'll be given an acting letter at the higher band until the advertisements can take place. Okay? Once the advertisements take place, if you're successful and you are appointed under open merit to the higher position, then you'll get a new contract at the higher position. If you're not successful in the open merit process, that's where your contract, your substantive contract comes back in. That's your safety net if you don't get the position at the higher band. Okay? So that's telling you that if you don't get the higher position through open merit, you've still got a job and you've still got a pay increase and it's at that lower band that you've got the contract for. Okay? So think of it as a safety net. In ministries where there are a lot of advertisements that have to happen, particularly health and education, they are preparing what we call a recruitment plan. So it's a schedule that will tell you that these jobs are going to be advertised in this month with an expectation of completing the process sometime down the track with appointments to take place shortly after, so that you can plan ahead and know when the jobs that you want to apply for are likely to be advertised. Okay? And you can get yourself prepared. You can do some training. We mentioned at the end of the presentation there's training available in interview skills and CV writing, so anyone who's planning to be applying for jobs needs to plan ahead and get themselves on that training so that you're fully prepared and can better compete in that process. So I mentioned there are 10 factors in job evaluation. So we trained 200 people across the civil service to apply the methodology. This is a commercial methodology. It belongs to a company called Strategic Pay, so that's the SP, and then there are 10 factors, so the methodology is called SP10. They're based in New Zealand. They partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers here in Fiji. So the methodology is used, this particular one mainly in the Pacific, so New Zealand and a number of countries in the Pacific. Other similar methodologies are used around the world. They all use quite similar factors and quite similar scoring systems. So the first factor is education. Education has quite a high weight in the overall evaluation. So each different factor has a different sort of weighting on it. And I'm not going to go through how that's assigned or the research behind it. If you're interested in knowing more, you can nominate to come and be a job evaluator. We're doing more training in November. So education is what's required for the job, because remember, we're evaluating the job and not the person. So it can't be the education that's held by the person, because the person might change. If the person holds a higher qualification than what is required for the job, that is not considered in job evaluation. That's considered in performance assessment. So when we assess performance, we would expect that if someone has a master's and the job only requires a degree, then they should perform better. And therefore, they'll get a better result and they'll move on to a higher step within the band. But it's not considered as part of job evaluation, and qualifications no longer can be used for any sort of automatic movement through the steps in the band. So if you currently have a diploma and you complete a degree, that doesn't move you to another step on the band. You have to wait for the performance assessment and you show how you use that qualification, that you're doing a better job than someone who doesn't have that qualification. Experience is the next one. So experience is also about the experience that's required for the job. How long does it take to learn to do the particular job? How long before the person from knowing nothing to being left alone? Okay, so some jobs, if you're a receptionist, for example, it might be 6 months. Right? By the time you learn everyone that's in the building, where you have to direct queries, etc., etc. So, but in other jobs, it can be many, many years to be fully competent. So there's obviously different scores for the different length of experience that's required for the job. And these are a couple of the areas where the job documentation was quite difficult, because people put what they had, not what was required for the job. And we could tell that because we'd get a batch of, say, 20 positions that were, or job descriptions for a position that was essentially the same, but the qualifications and experience would be different. Complexity is about the level of predictability in the job. So when you come to work each day, do you know exactly what you're going to do? Do you have set procedures? Is it exactly the same? Are you processing forms, for example, or are you dealing with people? So how predictable is the work that you do? Scope. So scope is about how much control you've got over staff and resources. How much control do you have over your work? Does someone tell you what to do all the time, or do you know what you have to do and you just get on and do it? Okay, so that's about scope. Problem solving is how much judgment is required. How many rules and guidelines are there, and how much judgment or how much decision making do you have to bring to that process in coming out with the end product? Freedom to act is closely linked to problem solving. So problem solving is about the types of problems that you face. Freedom to act is how close is the supervision. So when you have a problem, do you have someone else that you can go to? Are they in the same location as you? Is there someone else that can make a decision for you if you run into a problem? Okay, so those two are quite closely linked together. The next one is the impact of your decisions. So it's not about what happens if something goes wrong, because remember I said that we assume competence, we assume that people are able to do their job. But it's about do your decisions reflect on the ministry? Does the way you interact with people, the decisions that you make, can it have an influence on the way people perceive the ministry? Or can you make money for the ministry? Most of us, that doesn't really apply in the public sector, but can you produce a different outcome for the ministry? So the impact of decisions. Interpersonal skills is about the people that you talk to in your job. Do you talk to people inside the organisation or outside, and for what purpose? Is it what we call interacting and serving, so just providing information? That's generally what a receptionist would do. You provide general information, point them to the right place. Or are you trying to persuade them to have a different point of view? Are you negotiating something with them? Are you teaching them to behave in a different way? Okay. Authorities is about the formal authority to spend money or hire and fire staff. Most people don't have any authorities because there's not a lot of delegations in the public sector. But a lot of people do have a budget even though they're not actually spending the money. Okay? So, and it's a different score. If you're actually spending the money and you're responsible, like the permanent secretaries, obviously the score is quite high against someone who has no budget authority at all. And the last one is about how many people you actually supervise. So anyone who's a supervisor knows that the more people you supervise, the more complex your job can be, managing other people. So the more people, the higher the score. So they're the 10 factors. Each one has a score, and the end score gives the band. Okay, so there's a range for each band. The salary bands are developed quite independently of the job evaluation. So the job evaluators didn't know the dollars that were on the salary bands when the salary bands were developed. Okay. So the job evaluation set the band. The salary bands were then developed independently to say this is how much should be at each level. There are 15 bands. You've got a copy of them. They're also on the Ministry of Economy website. They've been there since the budget announcement. I didn't put them on the slide because they're too big. So there's 15 bands, A at the bottom, O at the top. All of the positions, including the GWEs, fit onto those salary bands. Okay. There's a range of information being sent out to ministries about the descriptors of the different jobs that are on the different bands. The budget snapshot from the civil service reforms has some descriptors, and we've been sending snapshots out since we started doing the roadshows to give you samples of positions that are on each of the different bands. The salary bands are benchmarked to the private sector. So we've been talking about that for a long time. What does it actually mean? They're benchmarked at the midpoint, so that's step 4. So in the salary bands, you will see that one particular step, step 4, is in bold, and that's called the midpoint. That's the point that is benchmarked to the private sector. So the Minister mentioned the compensation benchmark survey that was done early last year. That's where we started to do research with the private sector as to what they paid people. So we collected a sample of jobs in the public sector. We went to the private sector and said, how much do you pay for these jobs? Then we also did a separate survey for teachers and nurses, and we said for the World Bank again, if they could do some research around the region, not about what teachers and nurses were paid, but about what occupations were paid at a similar level to them, so that when we were benchmarking, we could make sure that we were getting a similar result. Okay? And then once we partnered with Strategic Pay, they partner with PricewaterhouseCoopers, who do the annual salary survey. The annual salary survey tells us for Fiji, they use the same methodology, so they say at this band, we pay this much. So that's what we worked the midpoint of. It's not 100% of the private sector. Originally we were aiming for 75% of the private sector. That was the recommendation from the World Bank. But as the Minister mentioned, what we found was at the lower bands we were already paying more than that. So we're not going to reduce anybody's salary. So at the bottom of the bands we're still paying more than the private sector. So band A, for example, we're on about 110% of the private sector. At the top, we're still about 60% of the private sector, and there's a sliding scale, and that's why it's not an even increase between each of the bands as well, because the benchmarking varies, the percentage to the private sector varies. And that's because at the top, we're still giving significant increases, so we don't need to take it up to necessarily 100% straight off. Okay. So there's a sliding scale, 94%. The bands, so the bands you've got a copy, and they're also available on the Ministry of Economy website. I mentioned before about the 15%. That also sets the step that you move to in transition. Okay, so everyone moves to the step that gives the maximum increase of up to 15%. So the position goes to the band, we know what band you're supposed to be on. The step is assigned based on the salary that you were on before. So you go to the step that provides the maximum increase of up to 15%. Doesn't like me. For anyone new coming into the service, the step is assigned based on how well they met the selection criteria. So if they only just squeaked in, so say they got 60%, they'd be on step 1. But if they met the selection criteria really well, at say 90%, they would be on step 3. Step 4 is what we call the competence step. So it's the step that's benchmarked to the private sector. It's also what we call the competence step. So once performance assessment comes in, we expect that anyone who is performing the full range of their duties will move on to step 4. That's where we're aiming for most people to move to. So steps 1 to 3 are for people who are developing into the role. So for people who are new into the service, people who are on probation, people who are not yet performing the full range of the requirements of the job. Step 4 is where we expect most people to sit eventually. And then steps 5 to 7 are for people who are doing more than the requirements of the job. So the high flyers, the people who are achieving things above and beyond what is expected for their role. Okay. So I think some of the misinformation that was going around earlier is, oh look, if you look at step 1, it's actually a decrease from where we were before. But that's because we don't expect people to necessarily start on step 1. Okay. So I mentioned all positions where the increase is over 15% must be advertised. This is to make sure that we have the best person in the job, because we don't have performance data at the moment. I know we have the APA, but other research that's coming through is telling us that the APA results are not matched to the ministry results. So in some ministries, the APA people have achieved over 90%, but when you have a look at the ministry against their annual corporate plan has only achieved 25%. So that doesn't match. So we can't use the APA results. We need a stronger framework to be able to pay these higher increases. The snapshot identifies those positions. So when you look at the snapshot, The snapshot is the 3-page document. Again, I didn't put it on the slides because it doesn't really fit. It is a sample of jobs. We can't fit every job into a sheet to bring it out to a session like this. Your ministry has the details for all positions. Okay. And if you think that you're not on the right step, I'll explain what to do in a moment. So the snapshot identifies the positions where the increase is over 15%. So you've got a band, you've got a couple of positions, and then you've got the old salary, the new salary, and the percentage increase. Whenever the percentage increase is over 15%, that's where the columns on the left-hand side come in. So we've shown what band the contract will be issued at if the increase is over 15%. Okay, and it is just a sample because we can't fit all the jobs onto a sheet like that. But each ministry has a full list of all the positions and all of the different steps as well for the different occupations. Health and education, in most instances, are issuing the acting letter. So if you have to go onto a lower band, they'll issue the acting letter at the same time. That hasn't happened yet for the specialist nurses because the list is still being finalised. Okay? This is where you've got the benefit. We didn't know that they hadn't been issued this time last week. Now we do, so I can tell you that that's why they haven't come out. Okay? So if you think that when you get your contract, if you think it's the wrong step, the first thing to check is to look at the next step, do your own calculation. Is it more than 15%? And if it is, then that's why you've gone to the step that you're on. If it is within 15%, contact the ministry because it is possible with such a large volume that there have been some errors. Most of them should be right because they're computer generated. So they're generated through a formula. So they should be right. But some of them have had to be manually calculated. There's only so much that the payroll can do automatically. So they're the ones that it is possible that we've missed and there could have been a higher step. So you're quite welcome to check, and we have an inquiries email. If you're not sure, by all means send us an email and we'll double check as well for you. There are other activities that are going on at the moment. So apart from the job evaluation and all of the other guidelines, I'm just going to go through some of the ministry level activities that are also happening because there's a lot happening. Business process improvements. All ministries are being encouraged to look at their processes to make their work more efficient. Remember, the bigger picture of the reforms is about improving service delivery to the public. In order to do that, we need to make our processes more efficient. We don't want you all to necessarily have to work longer hours. We want our processing to get better. The World Bank has been going around and doing institutional reviews in all of the ministries. They're basically finished. There's only education and industry and trade still to go. Some ministries are seeking external support when they're implementing the recommendations of those reviews. Mainly the recommendations centre around some sort of restructure and improving business processes. So depends on the ministry as to whether they're doing that on their own or whether they've asked for additional support to help them to implement. So in education, for example, they're doing a review of the ministry structures. They're looking at headquarters separately to the class sizes and the teacher staffing ratios. In health, they've started to do a review of the headquarters. They've got a top structure redesigned. They're now moving on to the layers under that. They're doing a review of the medical superintendent and the hospital manager roles to try and realign those two roles. And they're implementing the HR management information system. A lot of the issues in health stem from the fact that your staffing records are managed in a spreadsheet. And with a ministry as big as yours, that is bound to have some problems, shall we say. So they need a good system to help them to better manage the records. So that's starting, I think, November. We're bringing in a technical advisor to help with that, and so it should be November when that starts. So if you want more information after this morning's session, I know Bernie came over and did a session with some people over here a couple of months ago. She recognised some people. We have information officers available to come out and do more regular information sessions. We'll be coming back doing another round probably in December as well. You need to keep an eye out for announcements with your own ministries or through ministry circulars and in the papers about other sessions. If you want an update, you can request. Go back through your chain of command to the PS, and the PS will contact us and we'll send a team out. Okay. Obviously, we're not going to send a team for one session, but if one part of an organisation requests an update session over here, we'll send a team. They'll probably come for a week and run around and do sessions in different places while they're here to update and let you know where things are up to. The Minister mentioned different training that's available, and we highlight this as well. I mentioned the CV writing and interview skills training. That's actually run by the Ministry of Civil Service. So we're not part of the Ministry of Civil Service, we're separate, but they have a core skills training unit. So that's the package that they deliver. They also do the panel training for the open merit. So if you want to do either of those programs, you look on the Ministry of Civil Service website and nominate through your supervisor to do those programs. Through us, so the Civil Service Reform Management Unit, because we do the training when we're still implementing guidelines. So we run the training for the discipline guideline. All supervisors and managers are supposed to do the supervisor and manager training for the discipline guideline. Now, apart from the fact that we think it's a good idea, it's also good for you if you're going to be applying for any of these positions that are advertised to have done that training. It's something that you'll be able to use in the application process to say, this is what I know, this is how I do things. And also the investigation officer training. So keep in touch with your ministry particularly, make sure that you're looking for information. This is a partnership. It's your part to keep yourself informed. There's only so much that we can do in terms of sending information out. It's also partly your responsibility to be asking for information. If you haven't heard anything for a while, say, oh, we haven't heard anything. What's happening now? Is there something new coming? Or you might say, oh, in that session they said that the performance management would come out by the end of the year. It's now December. We haven't heard anything. Send us an email on the inquiries email and we'll be able to give you an update to say this is what we're doing now. This is because it may have already gone out to your ministry, maybe it's not filtering down to where it needs to go. This is where I normally hand back to the Minister.
Drink Coke. I normally don't drink Coke. Please take note of that email address. In fact, when I was sitting outside, I already saw a couple of emails that came on that. But if you have any personal issues that you may have that in respect of your actual issue, you can raise it with Jane afterwards. We are, after this question and answer session, when we go into the budget presentation, which is a quick one, we'll have Jane go outside and we can go and see her about your specific issues. But if you don't want to do it today, you can actually email it to that address and we can help you, solve your issue also. As I said that there are, of course, a lot of positive things that have happened because of the reforms. Generally, anywhere in the world, whenever you have any type of reform that takes place, there's always the transitional phase. There's always the transitional phase. One of the things that we have found out that some ministries have been actually very good in the implementation. Some ministries have been sort of halfway there. Some ministries actually have been terrible in the implementation. And that's where the problem lies. And as we saw in the consultations we had last week actually in Suva and various other places, the general feedback we got from the people that they're very much for the reforms, but they were concerned about some of the ministries' implementation of it, the speed at which it was being done and the manner it was actually being done in. So please, what we'll do is we'll now open up the floor. If you have, please.